last day when we were going to have the vote on the $15 minimum wage, until the last moments, the Democrats of the city council, and they were all Democrats, I was the only independent socialist, they were fighting tooth and nail to eke out any possible loophole for the billionaires. These Democrats, they don't come out and say, I am against 15 because I'm actually just a shill for the bosses and I don't give a shit about the workers. That's not what they say. They say, oh, we have to be thoughtful about this. Let's do a study. We need a subcommittee. Look, I agree with you workers, but I don't like the way Sawant acts. That is not the reason you're voting no. The reason you want to vote no is because you want to keep your paymasters happy, because that's the class you stand for. That's the class you represent. By that time, though, it was impossible for any Democrat to have a career in Seattle if they had voted no on the 15 now. We had made it impossible for them. That's the kind of fighting movement we built, and that's what we need to do in Washington, D.C.
Maybe it's a blind spot that, COVID era podcast boom left media has. But you were an elected socialist before it was cool, before even Bernie 2016. How did you pull off your many electoral and policy victories? Can you walk us through that process and what motivates this run for Congress right now?
Thanks so much for having me, Karthik. And as you said, yeah, we're running for Congress right now against genocidal Democrat Adam Smith in Washington State's 9th Congressional District. And our campaign is calling for a permanent arms embargo on Israel and free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich, among other demands. And yeah, as you correctly said, our campaign this year, it flows from the experience we had when I was on the Seattle City Council as an independent socialist for 10 years, for a whole decade. And I was first elected in 2013. In that campaign, we made a $15 an hour minimum wage our flagship demand. We also called for taxes on the rich and for renters' rights and rent control. And these demands really caught like wildfire the imagination of the Seattle working class. And that is what propelled us to victory, even though we were a clearly anti-establishment campaign. I was openly running as a socialist, and this is 2013. Remember, it was all, it's a world apart from the where we are inhabiting now. So yeah, so that was quite a remarkable achievement. It was truly historic. I mean, it made international headlines, and correctly so, because not only was it the first election of a socialist in Seattle in 100 years, it was also the first one in many decades in all of the United States. And it was a pushback, a historic pushback against this idea that you can't win as independents. You can't win elections as independents, let alone independent socialists. I mean, there were two black marks against me, and yet we were able to win. And in fact, I would contend that we were able to win precisely because we showed that this is a fundamentally different kind of campaign and candidate, that this is not a careerist campaign, that I was not running to make my own career and that I was going to make empty promises and just like all the Democrats and Republicans, just, all of that falls by the wayside once you come under the pressures from the billionaires and multimillionaires, which is the story of everyday politics under capitalism. And so this was a fundamental shift. Our campaign was a fundamental shift from politics as usual. That is precisely why we were able to win. And then after we won the election, after I took office in January 2014, I immediately launched the 15 Now movement, and through which we were able to win the $15 an hour minimum wage within 6 months of me taking office. And we won inflation increases, and we made sure that the wage applied to the vast number of workers, including franchisee workers. And I mention all of these because each of this, making the wage apply to franchise workers, if you're working at Taco Bell or McDonald's and all that, and making inflation increases happen, automatic inflation increases happen in the minimum wage. These were two key pitch battles we had to wage at the time within the $15 minimum wage. And so we went from zero vote from the Democrats for the $15 legislation to a unanimous vote for that bill. And the way we accomplished that was by me using my office to build mass movements, but not only that, building mass movements of a certain kind, mass movements with a class struggle-based fighting strategy. And part of that is calling out the Democrats when they are betraying the working class. And that type of confrontational approach, which in other words, I would call a class struggle-based fighting strategy, that is what got the goods.
You have a pretty significant base of support in Seattle. Can you talk a little bit about your organizing infrastructure? You have an organization called Workers Strike Back. You were part of a few organizations before. You have even been part of DSA. I believe a member of DSA at some point. But can you get into a little bit about what your campaign is like, what your organizing effort is like, what the issues of Seattle are, and how animated the base is about your campaign?
Those are all very relevant as we head into the August 4th primary election. Ballots are already out now and people are already voting. And so our campaign is very much a part of all the references you made to the organizing that we have been doing, including Worker Strike Back, which is a nationwide organization that I helped found in 2023. So we have branches and members all across the nation. And I'm also a member of Revolutionary Workers, which is a smaller organization whose members are also members of Worker Strike Back. And some of us are also members of the DSA. Like I'm still a member of the DSA. I'm a dues-paying member of DSA. Our approach to organizing is that we want any leadership of any organization, including Democratic Party politicians, who are willing to fight alongside us on the demands that we're fighting on and are willing to join us in the fight back against billionaires and multimillionaires, we welcome with open arms. So it doesn't matter what your party affiliation is, and if you agree with us on other things, like if you, for example, with the $15 an hour minimum wage, if you agreed with us on that, then we absolutely wanted to fight alongside you. That was the basis of building 15 Now. There were a few labor leaders, presidents of unions. One specific one I wanted to mention is Paula Lukacek, who was the president of 14 WUFC, the public sector union that represents plumbers and electricians at the University of Washington campus. She's still the president of that union. She was a key part of why we won $15 an hour, because she played a huge role that was in contrast with the majority of the labor leadership that had to be dragged into the struggle because they were initially didn't want it, because they never want confrontation with the Democratic Party or even with the bosses. And so that difference between her and the other labor leaders and what approach we use, all of that really is emblematic of how we build our organizing, which is that we welcome any leadership entities that are willing to join us, but we also don't allow them to gatekeep against our movements. In other words, we will still be building these movements even when the majority of the labor leaders, unfortunately, which is the situation today, don't agree with us. We will still be fighting. And what we do is focus on the rank and file of the movements, rank and file of the working class. Just to give you a very concrete example, in 2020, when we were fighting for the Amazon tax, this was during the George Floyd rebellion, many of the most prominent Black leaders, they played the role of what I call gatekeeping. They acted as gatekeepers on behalf of the Democratic Party and the Chamber of Commerce, both of whom were incensed. They were infuriated at our Tax Amazon movement. They hated it because the Democratic Party politicians did not want to be held under any pressure to vote against the interests of the big businesses that they represent, the billionaires that they represent, and the billionaires themselves, of course, they hated it. Jeff Bezos threw down $1 million money bomb the year before in 2019 to try to get me out. They didn't succeed. We won the re-election, and then we used the momentum from the re-election to launch the Tax Amazon movement. And in fact, we did the launch of that movement alongside the inauguration of my new term. It was part of the same ceremony. That's how we do organizing. It's never about me or my career. It's about using the momentum from our election victories to win concrete victories for the working class. And so when we were fighting for that, the George Floyd rebellion happened. Remember, COVID happened, George Floyd rebellion happened. And then at that time, many of the Black leaders locally, they played the role of gatekeepers, saying Tax Amazon is not a Black issue. You're not Black. You should sit down and shut up and let the Black leaders lead or whatever. We didn't agree with that. We said we're fighting for the Black community as a whole. And the Amazon tax, if we win, will raise hundreds of millions of dollars for affordable housing that's publicly owned, which means it is rent controlled, which will disproportionately benefit Black and other communities of color. Actually, this is very much part of the BLM movement. And we said that we're not going to take your word for it. We're going to go straight to the protests and talk to the thousands of rank and file there, many of whom were Black, but not exclusively. It was a multiracial working class movement, which was its strength. So we went directly to the rank and file of the movement. We went with our clipboards there and say, hey, do you want to tax Amazon? And the response was, yeah, fuck yeah, I want to tax Amazon. And that's the phenomenal support that we had on the basis of which we were able to win 30,000 signatures in 6 weeks. That is what tipped the scales towards us, and the Democrats were forced to vote yes on our bill. So that's just an example of how we do organizing. We're using the same principle where tragically and really shamefully, many of the labor leaders are endorsing our opponent, genocidal Democrat Adam Smith. It's really shameful. But the rank and file of the union movement strongly supports our campaign, and the rank and file of the working class as a whole, most of which is non-unionized, supports our campaign. So we have real momentum on the streets, but we're also being invisibilized by the corporate media. So it's no surprise that it is a massively uphill task.
Can you talk a little bit about your opponent here? And I will frame this as saying I believe he's a ranking member of the Armed Services Committee and also a member of the Progressive Caucus, I believe, right? Which is
Yes.
interesting, and also has been I think for like a few decades, I believe. And with this as the sort of pivot point, can you talk about how Democrats have this distance between the rhetoric and the action, and how like basically, for example, he I believe recently has come against sending money to fund the genocide of Palestine, and so on, and like, or at least like some sort of commitment to withhold like votes for sending arms to Israel. But at the same time, also, I believe co-sponsors a legislation that unites the two militaries, the U.S. and the Israeli military. So, can you speak about, and again, like how this connects back to the idea of Democrat politics, where there is a good amount of concession in the rhetoric, but not exactly showing up in the actions? And can you speak about your opponent in this respect?
You framed it correctly, Karthik, in the sense that the story of our opponent, Adam Smith, is really more broadly a story of what the Democratic Party actually is and what its actual role is. So if you look at Adam Smith's record, he's one of the 5 remaining Democrats in the House who voted for the war on Iraq. So the blood of 1 million Iraqis is on his hands. He's also voted to fund the genocide in Gaza, tens of billions of dollars, voted for bills repeatedly to ban United Nations food assistance to Gaza at a time when there were reports of catastrophic levels of mass starvation. He has voted for basically every war that has come across his desk. He has voted to create ICE, and he has voted to fund ICE to the tune of nearly $115 billion. He has been an agent of war, genocide, and austerity for the working class. He also voted for tens of billions of, actually hundreds of billions of dollars of cuts in Medicare and Medicaid. This is long before Trump came on the scene. He voted to deregulate the banks and Wall Street institutions, Wall Street organizations through the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. It's a hard one to say, but it was one of the laws that was part of the deregulation that the so-called new Democrat or Clinton Democrats were doing. And then under both Bush and Obama, he voted to bail out the billionaires and multimillionaires in the wake of the 2008 Great Recession, leaving working people in the lurch. You mentioned that he's the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. That's very relevant because in December, he brought forward a bill. He co-sponsored it. He was not a bystander and then happened to vote on it. He co-sponsored the bill alongside his Republican counterpart in the committee, the chair of the committee, Mike Rogers. He co-sponsored a bill to give Trump $906 billion for war spending. And then in June, again, this past June, he has co-sponsored a bill, which has not been voted on by the full House, but a bill to give Trump another $1 trillion new for war and to fuse the militaries, as you mentioned, and also with a massive escalation of weaponry for Israel. In the interview that he did yesterday and on Breaking Points with Crystal Ball, he acted like he spoke as if he was some innocent bystander for all these events. Like, oh, we've done this, we've done that. No, you've done it, Adam Smith. You have carried out austerity on the working class. You have been an arch warmonger and an arch Zionist on in Washington D.C. for nearly 30 years. I mean, he's been in Congress. He's been in office for 29 years, which is longer than many of my campaign volunteers have been alive. There's so many young people fighting for this campaign, and they're utterly disgusted at his track record. And so, yes, he is particularly villainous. He is a darling of AIPAC and the Zionist lobby. And at the same time, his story is also the story of the Democratic Party as a whole. Because, for example, the vote to create ICE and fund ICE, a whole number of Democrats have voted to create and fund ICE. That bill in that he co-sponsored in December to give Trump $906 billion of war. Well, guess what? A majority of the Democrats in the House and a majority of the Democrats in the Senate voted in favor of it. As far as most recent vote, the vote to vote yes on removing $3.3 billion for Israel's weapons. First of all, let's note again, that's why this story is about Adam Smith and about the Democratic Party. Is that the Democratic Party is like the Republican Party, is a party of the billionaires. It's one of the two most powerful parties of global capitalism, and they're very adept at playing the rotating villain game. And especially in election year, that becomes important because Adam Smith is facing the biggest challenge ever that he has faced in his 29-year career, and the establishment is extremely nervous. That they're nervous that if I make it to the November election, I have to be one of the top two vote getters. And as I said, it is an extremely uphill task. I don't want people to be complacent. But the point is that if we are able to do that, that poses a historic, electrifying challenge to the Zionist lobby. If there's a head-to-head match between me and Adam Smith for the November election, and the establishment, US capitalism and the Zionist lobby, they are extremely nervous about it. But most of all, Adam Smith is nervous because this is his career. He's a careerist politician. He sold his soul to the war profiteers and to the Zionist lobby. And he has had a easy ride for almost 30 years. It is the first time he's nervous. And so out of his nervousness, he voted against that amendment. But the reason it's important for us to note that the rotating villain strategy is that everybody knew this amendment was going to fail. So this was a very easy thing for Adam Smith to do, performative thing. And in fact, what's notable, Karthik, is in the Breaking Points interview, he literally said, I don't have any regrets. I don't have any regrets about voting to fund the genocide in Gaza. So that's really telling. And just in the month of June, Adam Smith has taken over $51,000 of campaign donations from Zionist PACs.
This connects to what you said about both the Democratic and the Republican parties being the parties of global capital. And I really like what you said to, I think, Chris Hedges once about how, the people in the US have the tendency to view the Democrats as left and Republicans as right. But actually, in the larger scheme of things internationally, they are two of the largest parties of global capital, which puts a lot of things in perspective. And, if you want to have internationalist politics, given that, then there is you have your task cut out for you. So the question for you is like, theoretically, we see the parties of global capital, etc. Stuff like this gets spoken about a lot, but you have actually been face to face with the adversarial nature of the Democratic Party in Seattle. So can you speak to, and especially, getting elected at a time when there is a huge surge of socialists who are, getting elected through the Democratic Party, accessing the Democratic Party ballot line. What experiences have you had with the Democratic Party that deters you from, adopting a similar strategy? And where do you situate yourself with the rest of the socialists who are getting elected through the Democratic Party ballot line at this point?
Well, I would say, first of all, the bottom line is the recent primary victories for the anti-war challengers, in New York City and in Colorado, against these seemingly invincible incumbents, Diana DeGette in Colorado, Adriano Espaillat in New York City, and all of these victories are a huge repudiation of the Zionist lobby and also of the billionaire class as a whole, because it really, the Israel issue, the genocide issue, is something that working people are angry about in itself. And in addition to that, it also captures the overall anger that working people feel, especially millions of young people feel about society today, where they are barely able to afford to pay rent and satisfy their most basic needs. And so these election results in the Democratic primary are absolutely strike against the power, against the idea of capitalism, and it's also a real pushback against the Democratic establishments, the Democratic Party establishments, pro-Zionist and pro-billionaire politics. And I think that there is a real opportunity for, many of these are now, they're going to Congress directly because they don't face any major challenge in November. And so the real question will be then, what do they do with their elected positions? And that is where I think the question of strategy comes up. And so for me, I mean, as a Marxist, as a revolutionary socialist, I think the starting point is theoretical, as you said, the recognizing the nature of capitalism itself is step number one. And capitalism is a system that it's not that it's not working well because there is huge inequality. This is what capitalism is. Capitalism is a continual class warfare against the working class from the ruling elite. And look at how vicious it is. Just since the pandemic, look at how much inequality has increased. Right now, we have the top 1% of America owning wealth equivalent to $55 trillion. That's completely insane. And people are people are having a harder and harder time to just get by. You hear even of, college faculty living in their cars because rent is so high, for example, in the Bay Area, in California, and so on. So all of this is something that working people are angry about. Working people are also really angry about the genocide. And all of this anger is showing up in these primary results. The question then becomes, what is the way forward for winning victories for the working class? So I think, first of all, I think we have to define what do we define as victories? In my mind, victories is not only just winning of the elections. In my mind, winning of the elections is in service of winning victories for the working class. Because if I win an election and I build a career for myself, then what good is that for the working class as a whole? That's good for me. Yeah, that's great. Right. But what working class people can't pay their rent more easily or fight evictions because I'm getting elected. So my metric is never my career, and always what is it that we can win from the working for the working class. And so for us, the election campaigns are in service of that. And so we ask the question, what is the way forward at this moment that can win us the biggest breakthroughs for the working class, and how do we accomplish that? So for us, the answer to that question could be running an election campaign. It may not be running an election campaign, but the election campaign is not an end in itself. It is in service of the question, what is the best possible option for the biggest possible breakthroughs for the working class? And at this moment, this is our best option to push forward, which is to fight to elect a revolutionary socialist to the US Congress. But then we define our successes. Obviously, that our election successes in Seattle are part and parcel of what I'm talking about, because I have never not been anti-establishment. I've always been anti-establishment, which meant that none of my re-elections was a cakewalk. In fact, I have a saying that I've said in some of my interviews, that if you are supposed to be a working class fighter and your re-elections are a cakewalk, then you're not fighting for the working class. Because at no point, whether it's city council or Congress or wherever, at no point will the ruling class of capitalism allow you to just coast to victory in any shape or form if you have actually succeeded in fighting for the working class. So in other words, there is no universe where you can win the victories for the working class and yet have a cozy, happy life for yourself where you have cordial relations with the people in power. That doesn't happen. You can build your own career, yes, but you can't win victories of the kind we have won. So it is not coincidental that even though the DSA has accumulated far more elected positions, hundreds of them throughout the nation, none of them have won victories of the scale that we have won with one elected office. The minimum wage that we won is so crucial to recognize as a historic breakthrough for the working class, because not only did we won the nation's highest minimum wage here in Seattle, which is now $21.30 an hour, but tens of millions of workers nationally were able to win minimum wage increases because of our victory here. Because always when you win something big like that, it's a contagious thing. Working people win victories elsewhere. And compare what we have won to what we have in Congress through the Democrats, that the national minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, is still at a disgraceful $7.25 an hour. How is that possible? How is it possible that you have 100 members plus in the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and you have no progress, zero progress on Medicare for all or universal public health care? Not only that, in California, where the governor is a Democrat, the two houses of the state legislature, the Democratic Party has a supermajority or a near supermajority in that legislature in both houses. How is it that in such a state, CalCare, which is universal health care for California, has been crushed 4 times in the last 10 years? This needs serious examination from the left. How is it that a Democrat-controlled state has rejected, the Democrats have rejected CalCare 4 times in the last 10 years, one just last month, the latest one. And this is in a state where 86% of the people support CalCare. So all of this shows you that the Democratic Party is a dead end for social movements, for working class people to win victories. It's not a dead end to win elections. Yes, we have shown that we can win elections, but that's not my metric. My metric is what can we win for the working class. And just one other example I'll give you is that there was a socialist who ran in Minneapolis for the city council in 2017. She didn't win the election because the Democratic Party carried out all kinds of maneuvers against her. But because she ran her campaign on the pledge of $15 an hour, that campaign, even though it didn't end up winning her the election, it actually built enough momentum that helped Minneapolis win the 15 Now movement, win the $15 minimum wage. So that's a concrete example of how campaigns like ours are crucial, because even when they don't win, because it's on the right trajectory, right, emphasizing the question of movement building and not electing somebody just as an end in itself, that prepares the ground, provides the momentum for future victories for the working class. And also, we have shown in Seattle that it is absolutely possible to win elections as an independent, as a socialist. We won all 4 elections. One of those elections was winning against an attempted recall of me by Trump supporting landlords, and not a single Democrat leader supported us against that recall. So much for fighting against Trump that they had no problem using the Trump supporting landlords to try to oust me from the city council. They didn't succeed, but that's the true nature of the Democratic Party. And that is why we don't believe that the Democratic Party itself is a conduit for winning victories for the working class.
In what ways do you think you would be, actually put yourself in Congress day one onward? And what are the priorities that you have? And how are you going to accomplish them? And in what ways are your strategies distinctly going to be different from anything that anybody elected socialist is doing at the moment? If you can add, I would say, and in what ways do you think you can actually involve them and work with them?
I'm glad you asked that, because I was going to actually preface everything by saying that that I would, if I'm elected, I would absolutely welcome any Democrat, progressive Democrat, or even if some Republican has a change of heart, if they want to fight alongside me for the demands that I'm running on, that the working people need desperately, like ending all military aid to Israel, a permanent arms embargo on Israel, free healthcare for all funded by taxing the rich, shutting down ICE in the detention centers and giving full citizenship rights to all immigrant community members, shut down the data centers and stop the mass layoffs, and instead fight for a public sector living wage jobs guarantee, which is a real pushback against the layoffs, and to win national rent control. I mean, this is just a short list of the demands we are fighting on. And so if any of the Democrats wants to fight alongside me on any of these demands, if I'm elected, I would absolutely welcome that. And anybody in Congress. And if they are fighting on anything that is in favor of the working class, that is in favor of the anti-war movement, all of that, absolutely, I would support that. So for me, it is very important not to be sectarian, and sectarianism being defined as leaders of movement leaders, wherever, leaders of any kind, who are unwilling to put the interests of the wider working class at the center, unwilling to prioritize that in order to nurse some internal grudges or in order to build their own small petty organizations, that type of thing. So we have a very non-sectarian approach in the sense that we absolutely always prioritize the interests of the working class. And I don't care if somebody has insulted me or if somebody has, personally been nasty to me. I don't care about any of that. If there is something at stake for the working class, I will always put that in front of everything else, not my personal comfort or my personal, petty questions. And in fact, we have done that all along. And as a matter of fact, the track record has been that it is the Democratic Party officials that don't support what we have done. I mean, in Seattle, our experience, Karthik, was not that the Democratic Party officials, I mean, the elected council members, our experience wasn't that they were a tiny bit uncomfortable with my approach and they generally supported the initiatives we were doing, but just didn't speak the way I did. Absolutely not. They were viciously opposed to anything that we were fighting for. Absolutely. And they often try to use backroom channels to crush the movements, or sometimes they were, when that didn't work, they were forced to overtly oppose it. So at every step of the way, we had to fight against the vicious opposition of the Democratic Party. I'll tell you, one of the moments that is tattooed on my memory is when we were the last day, when we were going to have the vote on the $15 minimum wage. Until the last moments, the Democrats on the city council, and they were all Democrats, I was the only independent socialist, they were fighting tooth and nail to eke out any possible loophole for the billionaires. They knew they had to vote yes on it because it had become such a prominent issue that they would have completely lost face if they had voted no. And that's part of a fighting strategy as well. You create a political price tag for every politician who tries to hide behind nice words but is actually opposed to the working class. In other words, these Democrats, they don't come out and say, I am against 15 because I'm actually just a shill for the bosses and I
Right.
don't give a shit about the workers. That's not what they say. They say, oh, we have to be thoughtful about this. Let's do a study. We need a subcommittee. Look, I agree with you, workers, but I don't like the way someone acts. That's why I'm going to vote no. Like, this is nonsense. That is not the reason you're voting no. The reason you want to vote no is because you want to keep your paymasters happy, because that's the class you stand for. That's the class you represent. That is why it's always a question of class allegiances. Which class do you support? And so by that time, though, it was impossible for any Democrat to have a career in Seattle if they had voted no on the 15 now. We had made it impossible for them. That's the kind of fighting movement we built, and that's what we need to do in Washington, D.C. But at the same time, they did not relent on every possible loophole that they wanted to win, including excluding franchisee workers, which would have excluded probably tens of thousands of workers, and then trying to deny inflation increases. So they were vicious about every aspect of it till the very last second. And some of those people who doggedly fought for the billionaires were women. They were black. There was a black man on the city council. These were the people who were carrying water for the bosses. And so if you want to win for the working class, you are left with no choice but to respond in kind and expose them. You cannot let them hide behind their lies. When they say, well, I can't support inflation increases because I'm concerned about small businesses. It is my moral and political responsibility, and I did this to say, no, council member so and so, you are lying. What you're doing is carrying water for big business, because all the studies we have looked at show that these things don't have a detrimental effect on small businesses. In fact, if the poorest of workers get a minimum wage increase, the economists have shown that it gets a bump for small businesses, because these poorest of workers, they don't have an ability to take a vacation to Paris. They're going to spend in local businesses if they have a slightly higher disposable income. So they will peddle these lies, and the only way you can stop them and defeat them is to call them out personally, individually. But it's not a personal thing. It's political. They are representing the ruling class. I am representing the working class. It is my job to call them out, because if I don't call them out, then they get to undermine the things we are fighting for and look nice. See, that's the ability we have to take away from them. If you want to undermine the working class, you can do it, but you're going to do it at such a steep price for your political reputation that you will not be able to recover from that. That's the fight you have to give them. And a lot of the times, this approach is framed by these politicians and the people who speak for them, a lot of DSA leaders. All of it is framed as, oh, Sawant doesn't know how to collaborate. She is not nice. Well, but that's not accurate. I am not nice to the politicians who are selling out the working class, but I have no personal, I have no personal relationship with them of any kind, friendly or not unfriendly. We are here to fight for the working class. They are here to fight for the ruling class. It's a class battle. That is what has to play out. And in terms of what I would do differently, first of all, I have pledged that if elected, I will turn my congressional inauguration into a mass rally of 10,000 people in Washington, D.C., and immediately use my office to start building momentum for the things we're fighting for. Especially the most important priorities are ending all military aid to Israel and free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich. So, taxes on the rich is also a huge priority as part of that. So already, we have said that if we win, we are going to use our office for mass mobilization and organizing, which is crucial. And that is crucial thing that is completely different. It's fundamentally different than any politician in Congress is doing. In fact, Most Democrats, the vast overwhelming majority of them, don't do this. And I'm being generous here just to say that maybe there's one or two who's doing it. But in reality, that is not the approach of the Democratic Party, because they don't like angering the billionaires. And there is nothing that threatens billionaires more than the masses rising up. So that is always our go-to. Whether it's in Congress or the city council, our go-to is always going to be, how do we use our office to build mass momentum? One other thing to explain the difference, you were asking, what would you do differently?
Yeah.
Medicare for all is a very important example. I mean, I don't say Medicare for all because I'm fighting for something much stronger. I'm fighting for free healthcare for all, and I'm putting the funding mechanism in there, which is by taxing the rich.
Right.
But Medicare for all is obviously wrapped up in that, and I strongly support it. But look at what's happened with that. Democrats have brought progressive, quote unquote, progressive Democrats have brought Medicare for all for a vote 13 times to my counting, probably more times that I've missed in the last 20 or so years.
Right.
And not once have they built any momentum around it. Not once have they brought it to a vote. That is not incidental. That is by design. Because if you fight to bring something to a vote, then that is when the battle begins against the Democrats who oppose you,
Right.
And if you don't do that, there is no concrete pressure on any Democrat. Any old Democrat can go around saying, "Oh, I support Medicare for all, and I also sign on to be a co-sponsor on a bill that they know, and everybody knows it's the best kept open secret that this bill is not going anywhere. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Everybody knows nothing's happening. We're just posturing here. We're just doing this performative, this political theater, so that ordinary people, see this, feel like we're doing something, and then we'll shut up and go away." That's the approach. We will do it completely differently, where we will actually fight to bring something to a vote. And what we will do is, personally, I will, and others alongside me, we will travel the nation building rallies to bring support for it. And part of that will be working people in every district nationally, putting pressure on their own Congress people, going to their town halls and dogging them, saying, "What are you made these promises. You said you stand with the people. What are you doing now? There's an actual bill that can be voted on. Are you going to vote yes or no?" That's the type of battleground of class that we need to create. But the reason it doesn't get done, and the reason it will be a political earthquake if I am elected, is not because of me, and it's not because it's me. It's because of the approach we are willing to use, which is that my priority is never going to be my cordial relations with other Democrats. And that's the problem. Therein lies the problem. AOC said something very accurately and truthfully. She said that if she were to do she didn't exactly describe it as I did, but basically she said that if she were to fight on anything, she would cause reputational and relational harm for herself with other Democrats. Well, that's dead right. That is what will happen, but that is what you need to do.
Right.
You need to fight for the working class, and for fighting for the working class, it will cause what she calls reputational and relational harm in the eyes of the Democrats. It's not going to cause you reputational harm in the eyes of working class people. People are going to love you for it. I mean, even today, I am not exaggerating, Karthik. When I go to Goodwill or when I go to the grocery store, people hold my hand, working class people hold my hand and say, "Thank you for the minimum wage," or "Thank you for the renter's right. That saved my family's life." People love, working people understand. They're not stupid. They understand who's fighting for them. And so ultimately, it is about class allegiances. Do you care more about being popular and liked by the Democrats in that cesspool that's Congress, or do you want to fight for the working class? Obviously, I'm not doing it for popularity. I mean, this is not a way to run. The way I'm living my life is not the way to run a popularity contest. You will get hated. But what I want is to be hated by the right people. The people who are holding the progress for the working class back, they will hate you. And if they don't hate you, you're not doing something right.
Is there any merit to this argument that there is a likability factor where if you not go along to get along, but if you wanted to form, for example, the 10,000 person rally that you're talking about, when you're envisioning this, are you envisioning yourself being the only person fighting this if it has to be? Or are you extending a lot of outreach and asking for support from elected members? Are you inviting more people more proactively, or are you seeing this as like something that you're carrying out on your own Because this is something that, like, I can't believe that I'm asking you this question, almost like how an NBC anchor would ask Bernie Sanders in 2016, where it's like, you're too grumpy, you're too gruff, people don't want to do anything with you. How do you expect to, get anything done in Congress? And I like the strategies that you've laid out. But is there any merit to this idea that there is some amount of getting along that you still have to do, and how do you plan to navigate that?
I'm glad you asked this question, because this is the question that I think there's a most confusion about. First of all, if I might just say, I mean, people who are watching this can or cannot take my word for it, that's up to you. But I'll just say, just quite honestly, that I don't think of myself as a grumpy or a gruff person. In fact, my people, just on a personal note, the people who know me very well, they know that I am anything but that. And that, in fact, I am known, my closest friends know me as somebody who has giggle fits all the time because I'm laughing all the time. They know also that I actually have to hold back my jokes, joke making when I'm speaking publicly, because my inclination is to make jokes all the time. Then I have to stop myself. I have to tell myself, don't keep making jokes, because this is a serious speech. So in reality, that is quite a mistaken idea of personally about me. But in reality, the way everything gets played out is political. I mean, we're talking about politics. We're not talking about who are your personal friends and what's your personal life like. This is politics, right? I'm here to fight for the working class. So everything is seen through that lens. It's not me personally. It's what I am able to achieve for the working class. That's the only force that is pushing me forward, not careerism. So seeing things from that lens, the fact of the matter, Karthik, is that myself, like, just to take the City Hall example, and I'll come to Congress in a second, the experience of myself and my fellow socialists who were in my office, I don't call them staff members because they weren't working for me. We were all collectively working for the working class. And so my fellow socialists and I in my council office, our experience was just overwhelmingly, I mean, there were exceptions to this, but overwhelmingly, our experience was that we were extremely nice to the Democrats, and they were pretty much horrible to us.
Right.
There were some Democrats who were very, very cordial to us, but it had a lot to do with politics. I mean, in fact, it has everything to do with politics. The people who were the most vicious to us, Karthik, were the people who wanted a progressive image, but did not want to actually pass any of the things we were fighting for. And that created problems for them. It created problems for them when they want to call themselves progressive. And here, Kshama Sawant, the pesky Kshama Sawant, comes with a tax Amazon legislation, and then, God, I have to take a position on that. So that makes it very hard for progressive Democrats. When you then that is important as a strategy for Congress as well, where you put things to the test. You don't allow them to just speak in generalities or just give speeches with nothing at stake. No, there's an actual bill. Are you going to vote yes? Or are you going to vote no? What are you going to do? Are you going to sell us out? Are you going to bend to the Chamber of Commerce? Or are you actually going to do something? So when you actually do that, most of the progressive Democrats hated us. There was one person who was very, very nice to us, but obviously it had something to do with his personality. He is a very congenial person, but it also had, I would say 99%, it had to do with the fact that he was the one who agreed the most with us, politically speaking. And so I would urge your viewers not to think of these things as just some, who likes who. It's not high school. It's not even a common, like an ordinary workplace where, of course, in an ordinary workplace, it is completely reasonable for, just human beings to have likes and dislikes. I like this coworker more than this other coworker. That's all fine. But City Hall and Congress, that is not a regular workplace. It is certainly not a family gathering. This is class warfare. These bodies are institutions of capitalism. They are meant to be run to govern the interests of capitalism. So, govern the capitalist state in the interests of the capitalist class. So my job, fundamentally, because my job is not to govern the capitalist state, and this is a strategic disagreement, fundamental disagreement I have with some of the DSA leaders. They keep saying, we are showing we are better at governing the capitalist system. Well, I don't want to govern the capitalist system. I want to overthrow the capitalist system. And so my role when I get elected to city council is not to, it wasn't to govern the capitalist state of Seattle. It was to disrupt business as usual and to win unheard of victories, and to educate the working class, really elevate the consciousness, expose the limitations of capitalism, expose the limitations of trying to move the Democratic Party to the left, all of that, how that is a failed exercise. All of that is part of what I'm doing. And so, by definition, the role that I am playing as a revolutionary socialist on behalf of the working class, it will make me unpopular among those who are simply there to make their careers inside the Democratic Party. So now what I'm trying to say is that it is what you see playing out is not personality likes and dislikes. It is what's playing out is politics, and what's playing out is vicious class politics. And to answer your question, would you invite people? Yeah, we had done that many times. For example, when we launched the Tax Amazon movement, when we had our first conference, I really urged some of the progressive Democrats to come and join us. And I urged them privately and publicly. None of them agreed to come, not because they don't like me. In fact, some of them, they were very friendly to me. They didn't come because they don't want to be held to account on the Tax Amazon, demand. That is why I'm saying that there is no real way of understanding all of this unless you understand that that what underpins everything you see playing out as personality, whatever things, is politics. And so ultimately it is politics. And no, I have never done anything on my own. It would be an absurd idea that and I like your analogy, like it sounds like an NBC interview or a CNN interview, because they're the ones who ask absurd questions like, are you going to do it on your own? No, dude, I've never done anything on my own. That's an absurd idea. How on earth can you win something like the nation's highest minimum wage as one person? I mean, I'm going up against the billionaire, the entire might of the capitalist class. No, we won it because we organized tens of thousands of people and brought them into action. That is not on my own. That is me alongside the biggest force that Seattle had seen for many, many decades. That is exactly what we will do if I'm elected in Congress. But I'll tell you this, because we operate on a completely non-sectarian basis, meaning we are always prioritizing working class interests, not petty grievances. If I don't expect this to happen, but I just want to put this on record. If any of the squad members or any of the new Democrats who are proceeding to Congress, and if I'm elected, that's a big if, obviously, because it's an uphill task. But if I am elected, and if any of those want to join our mass rally, it would be phenomenal. It would be phenomenally good for the working class. So no, this is not about me grabbing limelight or anything like that. It's actually very bad for the working class and our movements if it's only me. That is not a sign of success. It has to be more than me. And so if any of the people who were elected wanted to join me or wanted to organize their own rally and invited me, any of these scenarios would actually be hugely beneficial for the working class, and I would welcome that. I don't expect that it's going to happen, but if it did happen, it would be great.